Jerry, better known online as Gazelle Beauty, was born with megalocornea, an extremely rare genetic disorder that causes the corneas to grow far larger than usual. The condition gave Jerry unusually large eyes from birth, leading many childhood photos to go viral because of their unsettling appearance. While often mistaken for a cosmetic trait, megalocornea is a lifelong medical condition that can be associated with vision problems, light sensitivity, and an increased risk of serious eye complications later on in life. The disorder is so rare that very few doctors will ever encounter a patient with it during their entire careers. In 2024, 26-year-old American YouTuber Elliot Eastman repeatedly told his audience he feared armed men would come for him while living in a conflict-prone region of the Philippines. After marrying a local woman and openly documenting his life, income, and whereabouts online, Eastman randomly ended one of his live streams without saying goodbye. Roughly 2 hours later, armed men reportedly arrived at his home, shot him, and abducted him by boat. Despite extensive searches, his body was never recovered, leaving his ultimate fate officially unsolved but widely presumed fatal. This koi fish is unsettling thousands of people online because its markings look disturbingly human. The effect is so convincing that many viewers say it triggers the uncanny valley, the same discomfort people feel when something looks almost human but not quite. This fossil is so rare that it only forms in a handful of places on Earth under perfect conditions. This is a coral geode created when an ancient coral colony was slowly replaced by minerals over millions of years while crystals grew inside. The result is one of the rarest and most beautiful fossils ever discovered. For a few minutes each year, the setting sun lines up perfectly with Horsetail Fall in Yosemite, causing the water to glow bright orange and creating the illusion that molten lava is pouring from one of the most famous cliffs in America. Photographers travel from all over the world hoping to witness it, but many leave empty-handed when weather or clouds ruin the effect. When everything finally aligns, the mountain briefly looks like it's erupting. Just a few minutes later, the illusion disappears as quickly as it arrives. This Russian woman experienced what may be a worst-case scenario while riding an elevator. Just moments after the doors closed, the elevator's power unit suddenly exploded, sending flames shooting from the control panel and filling the small cabin with thick smoke. Trapped inside with nowhere to go, she was suddenly confined inside a metal box filling with fire and toxic fumes. In enclosed spaces, smoke inhalation can become deadly long before the flames themselves, with a lack of oxygen and exposure to toxic gases causing people to lose consciousness within minutes. As the damage continued to spread, the woman could do nothing but wait and hope for the elevator to reach a floor. Fortunately, the doors eventually opened, allowing her to escape the nightmare. This diver came terrifyingly close to being swallowed by a whale. He was swimming among a dense school of fish when a massive mouth suddenly emerged from the darkness beside him. The whale narrowly missed pulling him completely into its mouth, instead just stealing one of his flippers as it surged past. But despite how terrifying it looked, the whale likely never intended to target him. Baleen whales are filter feeders that feed on fish and krill, and while their mouths are enormous, their throats are typically the size of a human fist, far too small to swallow an adult. Had he been engulfed, he likely would have been trapped inside the whale's mouth for a few terrifying moments, before being spat back out as the whale filtered its catch. However, had he been dealing with a sperm whale, this would have been a much different story. Tyke was a circus elephant that had spent years performing in traveling shows across the United States. Former handlers later claimed she showed repeated signs of stress and aggression after 12 years of harsh training, confinement, and constant transport. On August 20th, 1994, during a live circus performance in Honolulu, Tyke suddenly became agitated and attacked her trainer in front of the audience, killing him and severely injuring another handler before smashing through an exit and escaping into the streets. Panicked bystanders watched as the elephant rampaged through downtown Honolulu for nearly 30 minutes as police chased her through traffic. Officers eventually shot Tyke 86 times before she finally collapsed and died in the street. The incident later became one of the most infamous examples used by animal rights activists campaigning against performances of circus animals. Here's a photo of Filipina resistance leader and former schoolteacher Nieves Fernandez showing a U.S. Army private how she used a bolo knife to kill Japanese soldiers during the occupation of the Philippines in World War II. Fernandez helped lead a guerrilla resistance force after Japan invaded the country and was reportedly so feared by Japanese troops that a bounty was placed on her head. Historical accounts credit her unit with killing more than 200 Japanese soldiers during the war. In 1994, pro wrestler Mick Foley was competing in Germany when a stunt went catastrophically wrong. While performing as Cactus Jack, his head became tangled in the ring ropes as he was thrown over the top rope. As his body fell toward the floor, the ropes violently tore part of his left ear from his head. A large section of his ear landed on the wrestling mat and was picked up by the ref, while Foley simply continued the match, initially unaware that something even happened to his ear. Surgeons later attempted to reattach it, but the procedure was unsuccessful, leaving him permanently disfigured. In 1932, outlaw Clyde Barrow was imprisoned at Texas's notorious Eastham prison farm, where inmates constantly endured brutal labor and violence. Desperate to avoid working in the fields, Barrow amputated 2 of his own toes, only to learn 6 days later that his mother had already secured his release. Barrow ended up walking with a permanent limp for the rest of his life as a result. While at the same prison, he was repeatedly sexually assaulted by another inmate and later retaliated by crushing the man's skull with a metal pipe, though a fellow prisoner serving life eventually claimed responsibility for the killing since he was a fan of Clyde's. In 2016, comedian Patton Oswalt lost his wife, true crime writer Michelle McNamara, after she died unexpectedly in her sleep at their California home. She'd spent years obsessively researching an unidentified serial killer and rapist she helped popularize under the name Golden State Killer. After her death, Oswalt worked to publish her unfinished book, I'll Be Gone in the Dark. 2 years later, investigators arrested Joseph James D'Angelo, linking him to at least 13 murders and dozens of rapes that had terrorized California for decades. Declawing a cat is far more horrific than simply removing its claws. The procedure amputates the last bone of each toe, essentially the feline equivalent of cutting off a human finger at the last knuckle. Because cats walk directly on their toes, declawing can cause chronic pain, nerve damage, arthritis, and lifelong mobility issues. Due to animal welfare concerns, the practice has been banned or heavily restricted in much of Europe, though it still remains legal in most parts of the United States. In April of 2023, 56-year-old Michael Dale paid an OF model more than $11,000 for an extreme fetish session at his home in Escondido, California. Dale reportedly requested a series of disturbing acts, including being wrapped tightly in plastic like a mummy and having boots glued to his feet. Prosecutors later said the session escalated far beyond what had been agreed to, with Dale eventually found unresponsive with a plastic bag and duct tape over his face, while the woman allegedly filmed parts of the encounter. He was declared brain dead the following day after suffering fatal suffocation. Michaela Rylersdam, a 32-year-old mother of 3, was initially charged with second-degree murder before pleading guilty to involuntary manslaughter in 2026. Built under Saddam Hussein in 1986, Iraq's Mosul Dam is considered one of the most dangerous dams on Earth because it was built atop a foundation of dissolving gypsum rock that constantly erodes beneath it. To keep the dam stable, crews have spent decades continuously pumping grout into the foundation to fill growing voids, with engineers at times injecting dozens of tons of grout per day as part of the around-the-clock maintenance operation. U.S. officials and engineers have warned that if the dam were to catastrophically fail, a massive wall of water could slam into Mosul within hours before surging toward Baghdad, with some worst-case estimates claiming up to 1.5 million people could die in the resulting floods. Here's an incredible look at a 2,000-year-old Roman aqueduct that still carries water today, hidden beneath the ruins of Smyrna Agora in Izmir, Turkey. This ancient underground channel was built during the Roman Empire to supply the city of Smyrna with fresh water. Using carefully engineered stone tunnels and gravity alone, Roman engineers directed water from nearby hills through passageways beneath the city. Remarkably, parts of the system still function nearly 2 millennia later, with water continuing to flow through the same channels built by ancient Roman engineers. Ferdinand Postman Cheval was a French mailman who spent 33 years building an enormous stone palace using nothing but the rocks he collected on his daily route. With no architectural training and only a wheelbarrow and simple hand tools, he worked night after night to assemble columns, towers, archways, and sculptures into a dreamlike structure he called the ideal palace. For the longest time, people in his village thought he was eccentric, but the finished palace was so extraordinary that France eventually declared it a National Historic Monument. This was the terrifying moment a textile factory worker suddenly got pulled into a rope winding machine. As the machine spun, the rope wrapped around his leg and dragged him toward the rollers in a split second. Luckily, the coworker by his side quickly hit the emergency stop just in time, likely saving him from a horrific death. Someone in Birmingham, Alabama was suddenly woken up by this life-threatening scene. A massive branch that crashed through their roof during intense storms. In something straight out of Final Destination, they were only feet away from being impaled in their sleep. This was the intense moment a foundry worker unknowingly dumped wet scrap metal into a furnace using a forklift. When water touches molten metal, it instantly flashes into steam and expands violently, triggering a powerful steam explosion. Immediately after the scrap is dumped, the furnace erupts in a sudden burst of steam and molten metal. The driver's forklift is briefly surrounded by the splash, but he miraculously manages to reverse away and somehow avoids any serious injuries. In 2002, Michael was staying at a hotel in Berlin when he dangled his 9-month-old son blanket over his 4th-floor balcony. Jackson claimed he was simply excited and wanted to show off his baby to the fans below, but the media was quick to criticize Michael's parenting skills and life-threatening behavior. Jackson later apologized, stating that it was a mistake in judgment and that he didn't mean to endanger his son. Blanket is now 21 years old and rarely makes public appearances. Michael became increasingly reliant on medication after being prescribed painkillers following the 1984 burn incident. Over time, it expanded into a combination of sedatives, anti-anxiety drugs, and sleep aids that he depended on just to function. He reportedly used aliases to obtain additional prescriptions without raising suspicion. But eventually, he lost the ability to sleep naturally, going long stretches without real rest unless he was chemically put under. In his later years, his physician Conrad Murray was administering propofol at home, effectively replacing sleep with anesthesia, leaving his entire routine built around cycles of medication and sedation. Before becoming an actor, Danny DeVito worked as a beautician in New Jersey, where one of his regular clients suddenly died. Her family specifically requested him to prepare her for the funeral, asking him to wash, set, and style her hair inside the coffin. After that, he began taking on similar work at a local funeral home, styling the hair of corpses and helping present bodies for open casket viewings, before eventually leaving that world behind to study acting at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. In 1928 in Los Angeles, a woman named Christine Collins was reunited with a boy police claimed was her missing 9-year-old son, Walter. She immediately insisted the child definitely wasn't hers, pointing out physical differences and even dental records that clearly didn't match. But instead of investigating, authorities instantly accused her of being unstable and had her involuntarily committed to a mental asylum. Months later, it was revealed the boy was an imposter, and her real son was likely murdered by serial killer Gordon Northcott. The case exposed major police corruption and later inspired the 2008 film Changeling. The results of Michael Jackson's autopsy report were nothing short of disturbing. He was largely bald with only sparse hair remaining, the result of burns and repeated cosmetic procedures, as he'd been wearing a wig in public for years. His scalp also showed scarring consistent with past injuries. He had multiple cosmetic tattoos, including permanent eyeliner and lip liner, likely done to maintain his appearance without daily makeup. His skin also showed signs of vitiligo alongside extensive cosmetic alteration. His arms were marked with numerous puncture wounds, consistent with frequent injections over time. Toxicology findings showed multiple drugs in his system and partially dissolved pills in his stomach, indicating recent ingestion. The cause of death was ruled acute propofol intoxication, a powerful surgical anesthetic. In the final months of his life, Michael was given propofol regularly inside his home to induce sleep, essentially relying on anesthesia instead of natural slumber. His personal physician, Conrad Murray, was later convicted of involuntary manslaughter for administering the drug outside of proper medical care. In 2013, in Los Angeles, California, 15-year-old Paris Jackson was hospitalized after a serious self-harm attempt. It came 4 years after the 2009 death of her father, Michael Jackson, during a period where she was dealing with intense grief, constant media attention, online harassment, and widespread public speculation that she wasn't biologically his daughter. She was placed under psychiatric care following the incident, marking one of the lowest points in her life after losing her father. When Michael died in 2009 in Los Angeles, it was revealed his finances were far worse than people realized. Despite his global fame, he was reportedly $500 million in debt, tied to massive loans, legal costs, and the upkeep of assets like Neverland Ranch. His death triggered a complex financial collapse behind the scenes, forcing his estate into an immediate battle to stabilize what he left behind. Immediately after his death, Michael's body was held for weeks during autopsies and investigations, and kept in a private mausoleum as family disputes and legal issues delayed the funeral. His public memorial at Staples Center drew millions, ending with his daughter Paris Jackson breaking down in tears in one of the only times she ever spoke publicly.
Ever since I was born, Daddy has been the best father you could ever imagine. And I just wanted to say I love him so much.
But even after he was finally laid to rest more than 2 months later, his death triggered years of lawsuits, accusations, and renewed abuse claims, including those reignited by the documentary Leaving Neverland. Instead of closure, everything around him only grew more disputed, leaving behind a legacy that's still being argued over long after his death. In July of 2016, 17-year-old Mike Mansholt suddenly disappeared while exploring ancient catacombs on the island of Malta. 5 days later, his body was found at the base of a cliff, and investigators initially believed he had died in a fall, but the autopsy revealed disturbing inconsistencies. Despite the apparent fall, he had no broken bones, and examiners found that his internal organs were missing, removed through a large opening in the abdomen. Authorities were never able to explain how the organs were removed or what happened to them, leaving the circumstances of his death deeply unsettling and unresolved. Rape-kun was a Humboldt penguin at the Tobu Zoo in Japan, whose longtime mate Midori eventually left him for a younger penguin, leaving him largely isolated from the rest of the colony. But in 2017, the zoo placed cardboard cutouts of characters from the anime Kimono Zoo around the park, including one of Hululu, an anthropomorphic Humboldt penguin, inside his enclosure. Visitors soon noticed Rape-kun repeatedly standing next to the cutout for long periods, and even displaying what appeared to be courtship behavior toward it. Photos of the unusual bond soon went viral online, and the zoo eventually decided to leave the cutout inside the enclosure for him. Rape-kun died a few months later at about 21 years old, with the cardboard character still standing by his side. Takeru Kobayashi, the competitive eater who helped popularize modern eating contests, said he stepped away from competition after years of extreme training left him disconnected from normal hunger. In recent interviews, he's explained that he rarely feels hunger and sometimes even forgets to eat, saying he envies people whose bodies still send basic appetite signals. Kobayashi suggested that constantly forcing himself beyond fullness may have dulled the body's natural warning system, with doctors noting that long-term competitive eating can distort hunger cues and place lasting stress on the body's digestive system. In December of 1984, 12-year-old Janelle Matthews disappeared from her home in Greeley, Colorado, after returning from a school concert, leaving behind signs that she'd been taken from the house. For decades, the case went unsolved until construction workers discovered her remains in 2019, 15 miles away from where she disappeared. Investigators soon focused on former neighbor Stephen Pankey, who'd repeatedly inserted himself into public discussions about the case and referenced it several times while running for governor of Idaho. Prosecutors said his own statements and changing stories helped tie him to the crime. In 2022, Pankey was convicted of kidnapping and murder and later sentenced to life in prison. 23-year-old Arizona man Christopher Todd Eric died following a mental health crisis and was mistakenly recorded as unclaimed due to a clerical error, according to his family's allegations. Years later, his mother said she recognized his preserved body inside a public anatomical exhibit, where it had been plastinated and displayed without her knowledge or consent. She's since pursued legal action seeking to recover his remains and challenge how unclaimed bodies are processed, sparking debate over consent, medical displays, and the ethical handling of human remains. A Connecticut man survived a horrific workplace accident after his arm became trapped inside an industrial furnace for 3 days. As circulation failed and tissue began to decay, he reportedly tried to amputate his own arm using a saw blade after noticing the smell of rotting flesh, but he lost consciousness from pain before he was able to finish. Concerned when he failed to show up for work, a friend contacted authorities, and rescuers eventually freed him, preventing a more than likely fatal outcome. Florida high school principal Dr. George Kenny built a devoted following by hypnotizing students to boost confidence and performance despite not being licensed. But in 2011, 3 teens he had worked with died within months of each other, 1 in a car crash and 2 by suicide, raising alarm from families who believed the hypnosis may have caused psychological harm. Investigators never proved a direct link to the deaths, but Kenny was charged with practicing hypnosis without a license, pleaded no contest, and resigned in 2012. Lawsuits from the victims' families ended in settlements, while Kenny quietly left Florida and withdrew from public life, leaving the controversy unresolved. John C. Woods, the U.S. Army hangman who carried out the executions of Nazis at the Nuremberg trials, completely lied about his qualifications to get the job, claiming prior experience as an executioner when none of it could later be verified. As a result of his incompetence, several condemned Nazi officials did not die from a clean neck break, which is the intended outcome of a properly calculated drop. Instead, multiple prisoners slowly strangled in agony, some taking up to 20 minutes to die while witnesses observed visible suffering. Despite complaints from observers, Woods continued performing executions and was never formally disciplined for the botched hangings. Here's an image showing what the sinking of the Titanic would have actually looked like on April 15, 1912. It was a moonless night in the North Atlantic, and once the ship's power failed, the massive liner disappeared into near total darkness, leaving over 1,500 people unable to clearly see the ship, the lifeboats, or even each other. Many survivors later reported hearing screams from the water but couldn't see anything, as the lack of light turned the disaster into something disorienting and almost invisible. It wasn't just the freezing temperatures that made it so horrifying, it was also the darkness, where one of the worst disasters in maritime history unfolded out of sight. In 1922, a young girl with severe diabetes was photographed while essentially waiting to die, at a time when the condition was almost always fatal, especially in children. Before there was any treatment, patients were often placed on near-starvation diets to slow the disease, leaving them dangerously weak while their bodies continued to deteriorate. That same year, doctors administered a new experimental treatment called insulin, one of the first times it had ever been used on a human. Within days, patients who were expected to die began to recover. The discovery transformed diabetes from a death sentence into a manageable condition almost overnight.